Do you feel like your church is running really efficient? Like you are doing events, you're doing processes, you're doing discipleship, everything is running smoothly. When somebody comes in, they know exactly where they need to go. When they sign up for your next steps class or your first steps class or whatever you call your entry level class, they know exactly where to go after that and after that and after that. And they move through very efficiently, very effectively. You move people from visitor to volunteer really well. Well, that's great. It's a good sign. It's a sign that you have grown up. It's a sign you've moved from church planting into your infancy and adolescence and all of those things. You've hit your prime. But it could be a sign that you've also moved into maturity. Now, that sounds like a good thing. It sounds like getting to maturity is great because as adults, when we look at our teenage children, we're like, I just wish you would grow up and be a little more mature. But as a church, when you hit maturity, it's a sign that you're on the downward slope. You've reached the peak of your church life cycle. You've gone past prime, and now you're starting to move down the other side, the down slope, moving towards that day when you're going to shut your doors. And so what I want to do today is I want to explain to you what the maturity stage is and the stage after that, what they look like, so you can start identifying, are you there, and is it time to do something about it? All right, so let's get started.
So the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. So glad you're here. So glad you're joining me wherever you are and whatever it is you are doing. As always, here at Ministry Hackers, our focus is to help you as a pastor, as a ministry leader, help you grow your church, grow your ministry, deepen discipleship, and at the same time, have free time, have margin in your time, margin in your finances so that you can spend time with your family, spend time with your friends, doing hobbies. If you're a woodworker, maybe you like to travel, maybe you're an artist and you like to spend more time doing that. Whatever it is you do, what we try to do is make sure that you can do ministry at the same time, enjoy those parts of your life that you love and that you enjoy. And so I'm so glad that you're here, so glad that you're a part. And if you're serious about doing that, if you're at a point where you're saying, I'm tired of the overwhelm, I'm tired of anxiety, I'm tired of serving in ministry and just feeling like I just can't get ahead and I just can't quite spend enough time with my family and friends, I just can't make the baseball games or the recitals or whatever it is you're wanting to do. If that's how you feel deep down inside, then I want to encourage you. I want you to go to brandonpartycooper.com/more time, more money. And I want you to go there because right there you're going to find a step-by-step guide on how to go from being overwhelmed pastor to being fulfilling, living a life that's joyful and happy and filled with time with your family and friends. Go from being overwhelmed to that. Step by step, it's going to take you all the way through the process. It's going to show you exactly how to do it, what the stages look like, what you can expect each way. It's going to show you a complete roadmap of how to get there. So again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/more time, more money. Download your step-by-step guide so you can start moving towards that dream life that we talk about here on Ministry Hackers. So again, brandonpartycooper.com/more time, more money. Get your step-by-step guide today. Okay, so we have been talking about the life cycle of a church in the last few episodes. We've been walking through stage by stage. We've been going through it all. Each stage giving you a focus. What is the focus of each stage, as well as giving you some questions that you can ask to identify where you are in your church's life cycle. And what I want to do today is I want to go through the back half. So again, the life cycle can be represented by looking at a bell curve. And so what we've covered so far is the left side of the bell curve, the way up. We've covered the peak at the prime. And what I want to do today is I want to cover the downside. What happens after prime? What happens on the late stages of the life cycle? What do they look like? And what can you do about it? If you remember the prime stage is where everything is going great, morale is high, everybody's excited, almost like you're not even trying. Things are just happening without you, really putting a lot of effort in. It's the flywheel effect that we talked about. Malcolm Gladwell talked about the flywheel where you put so much effort into it that it just begins to run itself. Well, that's what the prime stage looks like. Your church, your ministries, your systems, your processes, your volunteers, you have put so much into them. You've invested in them, you've trained them, you've gotten to the point where they know what to do, how to do it, systems are working efficiently, and things are just happening. Not to mention that God is moving in such a way that it doesn't even make sense the results you're getting. People are getting saved without really you doing anything about it. People are coming to your church without you really doing a lot of marketing. Things are just happening. They're just working. That's what the prime stage is. And we can make that prime stage last as long as possible. But there is a point where the prime stage does come to an end. But here's the thing. Moving from prime into the next stage, which is the maturity stage, happens so subtly and it happens with such little transition that you quickly move from prime to maturity without realizing it. And you don't realize you're in the maturity stage until the later stages of maturity. And the reason this is a problem, the reason this can be challenging for pastors like you and I, is that we are riding that wave of emotion, we're riding that wave of success, we're riding the wave of God doing great things, and before we know it, we are past prime and almost out of maturity before we realize something doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem right. You find yourself looking backwards more than looking forward. You find yourself remembering rather than planning. And that's what the maturity stage is. The maturity stage is the settling in stage. This is a stage where everything has gone great, everything is moving and happening, and everything is going wonderfully. And so now you're starting to settle in. You're coming off the high of prime, and you're settling into our systems are working great. Our volunteer process is working. Our training is happening so well. Our discipleship is knocking it out of the park. We're getting people. And here's where we also get stuck. We start looking at numbers too much. And we stop using our intuition. Because the thing is when we look, I'm a big proponent of numbers. I think you need to collect your data, you need to have your data, and you need to look at your data to know what's happening in the undercurrents that you're not paying attention to. So I'm a big proponent of data. But here's the other side of that. If data is driving all of your decisions, then it's easy to stop relying on your intuition. Those decisions you made at the earlier stages, especially in the early like the infancy and childhood and even the adolescent stage, there were decisions that you made that maybe to a certain extent didn't make sense. Maybe you just couldn't quite put your finger on it. You felt God pushing you in a certain direction, so you just went that direction. And even when everybody else around you maybe was saying, Pastor, that doesn't make any sense. We probably shouldn't do that. You still pushed through because you had this gut feeling that God was leading you and you were going to follow. Well, in the maturity stage, you still get those gut feelings. But now you have all the processes and systems and all of the structure in place that you just kind of leave it up to all of that to make those decisions. You rely on what you have done more than that intuition. And when you're in the maturity stage, when you transition from prime into maturity, it's easy to get lost in the mix. And then when you get towards the end of that maturity stage, you realize, man, we don't have those moments anymore. We don't have those like gut feeling like God is moving and we're just going to go. You don't have those as much. And that's a sign that you're now in the maturity stage and you're relying on what you have done. You're relying on what you've built. You are settling in to ride the wave. In the prime stage, you're not settling in to ride the wave. You are still creating the wave because the excitement is going and everything is moving and happening. And you reach a point where things are just happening without your effort. And it's easy to go from, hey, things are just going awesome, and I'm just going to settle back. Maturity. Now you're settling in. And when you settle in, that's the beginning of the end for innovation, for new ideas, for new approaches to ministry, even to a certain extent really reaching out into your community. This is where, as churches and pastors, we start to stay in the building more. We're not out in the community as much. We're in the building. People are coming to us for ministries. They're coming to us for events. We're not going out. We're staying in, and they're coming to us because we've gone through this prime stage where everything was going great and people were just flocking to the building. And so through that whole transition, we stop doing things outward and we start just waiting for people to come to us. That's the maturity stage, the settling in stage. And the focus here starts to become, without us realizing it and without us intentionally doing it, is we start protecting our borders. We start protecting the things that we've built. We've created lots of great systems and processes. Our ministries are running well. Things are happening. And so we start protecting those. And when I say protecting, what it means is we stop changing them. In the earlier stages, things could be going well, but we would be like, but I think it could be better. And we would try something new. Or maybe it wasn't going well and you're like, let's shut that down and start something else. Or let's shut it down, retool it, and relaunch it. In the maturity stage, things are running well and we're just kind of like, let's not break it. and some of that is we feel like God has told us to do this ministry or do this thing, develop this outreach, whatever. And so we don't want to touch what God has told us to do. And it was working so well in the prime stage that moving in the maturity stage, we're like, but God told us to. And maybe that's the case. Maybe God has told you to start that ministry and he hasn't released you to shut it down or released you to change it or retool it or whatever. But I think that more often than not, God does tell us to start those things along the way. But along the way, we also shut things down that God has started. God, in the early stages of church planting, we felt God was giving us a certain direction or a certain mission, or even was calling certain people onto our team. But that changed over time. As we went into the latter stages, we lost some of those people, or the mission changed a little bit, or it tweaked, or it retooled. But for some reason, when we go through the prime stage and everything works wonderfully, we start to hang on to those things tighter because we think that it's those things that made the church grow so much and operate so well. When really, it's just God has led us to this point and we're just waiting for him to lead us to the next point. And at the maturity stage, that's happening. God is prompting us a lot of times to shut some things down or to move in a different direction. But our ears are not quite tuned in as much as they used to be because we're protecting our borders, especially if you're starting to see things slip. So especially, let's say, for instance, in the prime stage, let's say you grew from a church of 500 to a church of 1,000. But now you've started to notice that your numbers are starting to slip. Maybe you're at like 900 now. Maybe you're at 850. And so then it's like, oh my goodness, what's happening? Why are we losing people? What's happening? And so you might tweak this or that, but you're not making any major changes, which is what really needs to be happening. It's time. This is the point, and we'll talk about this in a later episode. This is the point where change needs to start happening. But because of the things that we have put in place in the prime stage that led us to this point, we don't want to change them. And there's a good chance God's saying, hey, that served its purpose, but now it's time to move in a different direction. And not that we're resistant to God and not that we don't hear God, but I think we get comfortable where we are. And we all do. That's human nature. We get comfortable. We settle in. And that's where the maturity stage is we're settling in. Okay, so let me give you 3 questions you can ask to determine whether or not you are in the maturity stage. The first one is, do new ideas get passed over for proven processes? Is the mantra, if it isn't broken, don't fix it? If that's the mantra, then there's a good chance you're in the maturity stage. Because things that are working well sometimes just need to be fixed. They just need to be changed. They need to be retooled. Things, especially in ministries serve a purpose for a time. And then we move on. And we've seen this. We look over church history and we see that happening. We see changes in ministry practices. We see that in different approaches, and they serve for a time. And it's when pastors, when churches hold on to those practices too long, and they go from being less effective to ineffective, but yeah, we still hang on to them. because it worked at one time in the past. And so our new idea is getting passed over for proven practices. And if that's the case, there's a good chance you're in the maturity stage. Our systems and ministries running at high efficiency. Again, you've gone through the prime stage where things are just working, they're running. And now you've moved into the maturity stage, which means that those things are still running efficiently. The systems and processes, you aren't touching them, you're leaving them alone. People are moving in from visitor to volunteer pretty effectively, pretty efficiently. The problem, though, is there's a little bit of disconnect. You don't know those people as well. They've moved through a system without a lot of personal touch. If your systems are running effectively and efficiently, that's a good indication that you're probably in the maturity stage. Because in the prime stage, things run efficiently, kind of, but things are just happening so much and they're happening so fast and growth is just happening without you really doing a lot. You're not putting a lot of time and attention into how those systems work. And usually at the prime stage, sometimes in the adolescent stage, but primarily in the prime stage, what we do as pastors is we're like, man, all these things are growing and we have to scale and we have to make sure that the systems are ready. And so we get them all right where they need to be just in time to slip into the maturity stage. And so if everything is running efficiently, there's a good chance you're in the maturity stage. And then the third question, is everyone starting to look alike? Now, I'm not saying, is everybody the same ethnicity? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, is everybody coming from the same socioeconomic class? I'm not saying that either. What I'm saying is everybody kind of dressing the same? Is everybody kind of talking the same? Are we moving kind of towards this almost like a cookie cutter congregation to where you can plug and play different people into different places and there's no real difference? Now, again, I'm all about leadership and development and training, and I think all those things are valuable. But human nature lends us to the more we run people through the same processes that don't change and spit out people on the back end that are trained the same way, have the same experiences, everything else, over enough time, they all start to look alike. Their personalities kind of adapt to the culture of the church. In the earlier stages, the culture was defined but not solidified. And so there was a lot of variance and a lot of differences of ideas and personalities and all of those things. But as we go into the prime stage and we have this big explosion, we have lots of new people coming in and we're plugging them in and working them out and getting to know them and everything else. Well, what happens is somewhere in the prime stage, in the later stages of prime, where we're getting ready to move into maturity, what happens is a lot of that diversity and personality and attitude and thought and everything else starts to weed out. And as you slip into the maturity stage, what's left are all the people that agreed, that all the people that got along, all the people that hung out together, all the people that kind of look alike. And what that means is that if somebody comes into your church that isn't like that, they immediately feel out of place. In the prime stage and adolescent stage primarily, at those stages, a new person could come in who didn't matter what they looked like, it didn't matter their thought process, it didn't matter any of those things. They just kind of were in there and they were a part of the excitement and part of growth and part of everything that God was doing and all that. In the maturity stage, they walk in and like, whoa, I don't belong here. These people are not my people. That's a good sign you're in the maturity stage. After the maturity stage, we then move into the aristocracy stage. And this stage has come full circle. This is the survival stage. Just like at the infancy stage, it was survival, we've arrived back at survival. This is the stage where we are spending more of our time. Our focus here is remembering the past. The conversations are more about prime. They're more about, oh, do you remember when God did that? Or do you remember when we used to do that? Do you remember when we had that outreach? Do you remember when we had that ministry? The conversations are more about what has happened rather than about what's going to happen. And so at the aristocracy stage, this is the stage where you have reached a point where there really is no return. Now, is there always a possibility that things could turn around? Always a possibility that you could re-enter into an adolescent stage? Possibly. It would take a major shift. And most congregations and most pastors who have reached this point are not prepared for that. They're not willing to things. They're not willing to make radical decisions. And if you're a pastor and you're in the aristocracy stage, I think that you have two choices. Either you make the decision that you're going to make some radical changes regardless of what anybody else around you thinks. Now, if you can lead and you can garner the people that are remaining in your church to get behind that, that is obviously the best choice. But there's a good chance you've reached aristocracy for a reason. And the people that are still at your church are probably not people looking for change. And so they may not get behind a radical shift in ministry style at this point. If you can lead them there, then definitely do that. But if they are resistant, then I think you have one of two options. Either you start making some radical changes and weather the storm of the kickback that's coming, or you move on to another place. You have to decide, though, first, are you ready to enter into those earlier stages? Are you ready to either take the church that you're at or go into another church and enter in the challenges of the infancy stage, the childhood stage, the adolescent stage? If you're ready for that, then make the change. If you're not, and if you just don't have the energy, you don't have the brain power, you don't have the endurance to do it, then there's a good chance you're just going to ride out the aristocracy stage as long as you can. The aristocracy stage, like I said, it's remembering the past. It's looking backwards. It's not looking forwards. If you can get your congregation to begin to look forward, and I have seen this done. I've seen congregations who are 20 to 30 people. They have this beautiful building. At one time, they were several hundred people, and they just recognize that their time has passed. Now, some at this stage ride it out all the way to the end until there's only a couple people left, or until the finances run out and they have to abandon the building, or whatever. They just come to a point where the door's shut and they move into the final stage, which is death. But I have seen a handful of congregations that say, you know what? We recognize that our time and what we did, however many years ago at the prime stage, what we did at that point has passed. And we want to be a part of the next generation coming in. And so they make the decision to change things. They make the decision to be forward thinking rather than backward remembering. They make the decision to say, it's not about my comfort and what I want. It's about figuring out how to get new people in here to build it up. Now, it's not an easy task. It's a tall order, definitely, but it can be done, and I have seen it done, where an older congregation in the aristocracy stage looking at closing their doors makes a complete 180, figures out how to bring in new people, how to serve them, how to lift them up, how to bring them into relationship with Christ and disciple them, and start a whole new life cycle at the infancy and childhood stage. I've seen it. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work, and as a pastor, ministry leader, your job is going to be challenging to do it, but it'd be incredibly rewarding to do it. And honestly, on your end, as soon as you can bring in a younger pastor to mentor them up to then later hand it off to, that's ideal. That would be ideal. The aristocracy stage, though, is a painful stage to be in because you are facing two choices. Death of the church, which means shutting the doors and abandoning a building, selling it off or whatever, or abandoning everything you've loved and everything that's gotten you there for a new way of thinking, a new ministry style, a new approach, a new look, a new feel, a new everything. Either way, you're going to say goodbye to the past. Either way, you're going to shut the doors on everything that has happened in the church life cycle up to that point. It's just a question of, on the other side, are you going to shut the doors to the building for good and say goodbye to the church and move on and sell it? Or are you going to reinvent and move into a new future with new ideas. So the 3 questions you can ask here is, do we seldom have new people? And when we do, very few stay. You'll have a young family who will they will stumble into your church and realize this isn't the right place for us, and they leave. And you and your congregation are super excited because when they come in, you're like, oh, new people, and you go and talk to them, you touch base with them, and you try and connect with them as much as you can, but in the end, maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month, but then they eventually leave because it's just not for them. The second question is, are most decisions that are made focused on maintaining the congregation you have? You have a congregation of 20 or maybe 50 people, and every decision is funneled through this filter of, am I going to offend or am I going to lose the handful of people that we have? It's a maintaining mentality. We are just maintaining. We're just trying to keep the few that we have as long as we can keep them. If that's where you are, then you're in the aristocracy stage. And then the final question is being a pastor at this church, at this stage, is it pretty easy besides having to deal with grumpy congregants? As a pastor, are you just dealing with complaints? And that's really the most challenging part of pastoring this church. If that's the case, you're probably at the aristocracy stage. Now, if you're at the aristocracy stage, you're probably dealing with finances. Finances are probably way low. Maybe you have this big building you're trying to manage and you just don't have the finances for it. But you can navigate all those things. You're navigating complaints without a lot of real answers. That's the challenging part. Because you're trying on one hand to maintain the group of people that you have. And there's a part of you that wants to move into a new direction and do new things and bring in new people. But there's always this tug back to the complaints. Well, Pastor, we didn't really like that. Well, Pastor, I don't really think that's who we are as a church. If that's the case, then you're probably in the aristocracy stage. Now, again, things can turn around. That is possible. But it's very unlikely at this point. And really the only thing that you're looking forward to is the final stage, and that's the death stage. And there's not a lot of questions. There's not a lot of focus here. It's just like in the church planning stage, when you open those doors for that first service and everybody floods in, well, the death stage is you close those doors for the last time. You put the lock on. Maybe you sell the building off, or maybe you hand over the deed or turn over the keys, and that's it. The church has gone through its entire life cycle. Now, there's a part of us that feels very sad and broken about this idea that a church is going to shut its doors forever and die. And I think for me, I feel that. Like, to know that churches are closing their doors is heartbreaking. But at the same time, this idea that every church building and every church congregation is going to last till eternity, until God comes, might be a little idealistic and a little unrealistic. Because everything has a life cycle. Everything. Everything has a life cycle. Everything is born, lives, and dies. And a church really shouldn't be any different. Now, can we prolong that? Yes. And in the next episode, what I want to talk about is points of change. There are 2 very distinct points of change. Very strategic points that you can really make some major changes and not deal with a lot of fallout, not deal with a lot of kickback. Really, honestly, most of your congregation is going to embrace those changes, and it's going to keep that life cycle going. It's actually going to restart the life cycle for you. It's going to keep you moving forward and prolong the life of the church. And I'm going to talk about in the next episode and show you what those 2 points are and how to navigate both of them. And honestly, how to choose the right one for the moment that you're at. But again, the reality is a lot of churches shut their doors, and honestly should shut their doors. Many churches that are in that aristocracy stage, the best thing they can do is to shut their doors. And sometimes it's shut the doors to then reinvent and launch again. But it's still a brand new life cycle with a brand new feel and a brand new idea. So if you're a pastor and you're in the maturity stage, we're going to talk about in the next episode what you can do in the maturity stage and how you can choose your change point and reinvent and start your life cycle over. If you're in the aristocracy stage, it is possible you can do that. But quite honestly, you need to start having the more difficult questions and conversations of, should we close our doors? Should we partner with another church? Should we sell off the building to a church that's in the earlier stages and ready to grow? What can we do to increase growth to the kingdom of God, rather than just maintaining this building and these people until there's nobody left? Again, that's not a thing we like to think about, certainly not something I like to talk about. But it is a hard reality that I think as pastors we have to come to grips with. Our job is to be spiritual leaders, and sometimes we, as spiritual leaders, need to make difficult decisions, and that's leading in a church that's in the aristocracy stage to make hard decisions of reinvention, of closing the doors, of partnering with somebody else. That's our job, is to lead into that. So the life cycle comes and goes. Every church goes through it. Every church is at different stages, and that's even why comparing your stage to another church's stage doesn't really make a lot of sense, because it always looks different. What you need to do as a pastor and ministry leader is you need to have the conversations with God and the conversations with your leadership. Where are we going? What is the plan? What is God doing? How are we impacting this community? And what can we do with the time that we're given? And if you do that, you're going to see great things. And you're going to see God do great things. And people's lives are going to be changed. And that's what we're called to do. Go and make disciples. And then send them into the world to make a difference. That's our call. That's what we're here to do. And that's what churches should be doing. So wherever you are in the life cycle, take advantage of the stage you're in. Know the stage that's coming. Prepare for it. And make the most of every step of the way. Again, like I said in the next episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 2 change points, how you can maximize those and keep that life cycle going and restarting over and over and over again, so that your church is effective and making a difference in your community. All right? Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode.